A lot of wiggle room.
Welcome back to the ElkShape YouTube channel. Bringing MFJJ on again. This is part 2 of arrows and elk and adult arrows, is what I've heard they've been called. Josh, today's the day where you're going to be as straightforward. You're going to make some people mad, but ultimately we're going to try to help people coming out west.
Where there's a will, there's a way. Won't quit, I'm here to stay.
Yeah. Okay, this isn't really a whitetail channel, although I love me some whitetail hunting. You do too.
Sure.
This ain't a pig hunting channel, although I've shot a few, and that doesn't. I could never get tired of doing that. Have you shot a pig before?
Yes, I have. It's a lot of fun.
Probably a pile of them, right?
No, just a few. I've gone a couple times. It's been a good time, and I look forward to going again.
You've done it.
Do a lot, yeah.
We're talking about ElkShape and elk, wapiti. Let's talk about arrows. Let's talk about trajectory.
Yeah.
FOC. So on the first video, all we didn't really say our opinion. It was just like, all I can go off is me. I'm short. I have a 27-inch draw length. I'm trying to pull as much poundage as I can, where I still am in great control at 75 pounds. And at the end of the day, I'm settled in on a 460 grain arrow currently that goes 275 feet a second. And I like a fixed broadhead, and I like a FOC of 13 to 15%. What's up with all these 600 grain arrow type things trying to be lobbed at elk?
Let's be realistic here. First thing we want to mention is that your bow is tuned correctly. I'm going to preface everything I say here by it's being shot out of an effectively tuned bow. If your bow isn't tuned right, your arrow's not flying straight, you're bleeding energy really bad, and then maybe you need excessively heavy amounts of arrow to get penetration. The reality of most of these things, I'll give you my experience of things I have done and other people I know have done. I've killed elk with less than 400 grain arrows and gone clean through them without a problem, and not at excessively heavy poundages, i.e. 70 pounds. Now granted, I have a 30-inch draw length, so I'm generating a little more energy than someone with a 28-inch draw length or a 27-inch draw length, but I've never had a penetration issue ever. Like, I've never shot something that hasn't gone through, with the exception of the one time I shot an elk in the shoulder. And I am not convinced that you can shoot an elk through the shoulder with anything. I'm just not. Now, if you're running 90 pounds and a 600 grain arrow and you want to go through the shoulder of an elk, fine, but why are you doing that to begin with? That doesn't make sense to me. You shouldn't, that's not an ethical shot.
Well, I think of most people that hit the shoulder on an elk,
it's an accident.
It's an accident. It's a giant shoulder blade. Maybe they do or don't understand the anatomy, but there is a scap sitting on top of a humerus, and then there's also a knuckle joint. I mean, all those things are kind of like hardware for the elk, like, for sure. You know what I mean?
It's like armor.
And it really also depends on the broadhead you've chosen as well. But anyways.
Yeah, if you're using a 2-inch mechanical or an 1 3/4 mechanical or something that's going to displace a lot of tissue as it's going through, then you probably want to use something a little heavier. But I will tell you, I have shot elk with an 1 3/4 mechanical broadhead and a 400 grain arrow at 68 pounds and gone all the way through. Poked out the other side, kept going. I've done it at least 3 different times. It is enough. You're dealing with excessive amounts of energy. People get really fixated on this stuff for one reason or another, and I'm not really sure why it got so popular and so important, but the reality of it is it's overkill. What those things were designed for is a recurve, right? Like a bow that's producing 180 foot per second and 30 pounds of kinetic energy, not 300 foot a second with 80 pounds of kinetic energy. I mean, it's like apples and oranges. It's like saying I need an assault rifle to shoot a 22 tournament. It's not relevant. It's not real. You're gonna go through, unless your bow's tuned poorly or you should hit it in the shoulder. I do believe in 15%-ish FOC, somewhere in that ballpark, but I believe in that because of what it does downrange in accuracy, not in energy. You've done a video, or you're working on that video, part one with velocity, with drop, and do the kinetic energy equation. It's like a pound or 2 pounds of energy. So you're talking, I've got 75 pounds of kinetic energy with a 400 grain arrow, and then I've got 73 pounds of kinetic energy with a 600 grain arrow. It's 2 pounds. And your velocity goes down like 70 foot a second. How much more time does that animal have to react? I mean, a ton. And you and I both know when you shoot something, it reacts. And it will frequently react before the arrow gets there. So it's relevant and it's important. And you can't just look at one part of this equation and give it the most of importance.
Right.
It's just not, it's an equation of partial proportion, but not the entire thing. So if you're going to just say, I need 600 grain arrows and damn everything else, that's idiotic.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's ignorant and that's idiotic. You have to pay attention to everything. You can't just pay attention to one part. You want FOC without giving up velocity while maintaining energy. And to just blindly go into one thing is stupid.
So I think the biggest thing for me has always been trajectory at such a short draw length. And that elk move a lot. So I come to full draw, the bull's standing there 25 yards broadside. Yeah. For whatever reason, he boogers or spooks. Mm-hmm. I get him to stop. He takes 4 or 5 steps. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm at full draw. Mm-hmm. He's not going to allow me to let down, range in, move a mover, or
for sure,
just let down. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to hold the bow back and estimate. Okay. Yeah. And I feel a little more comfortable with my estimation, even if I'm off by a few yards, shooting flatter trajectories versus having something that drops that big at 40 yards, like a 18 inches of drop.
Well, look at a pre-generated sight tape of drop when you're doing a single pin sight and you go 30 foot a second difference, which is, I'm not sure what numbers you come up with upstairs when you tried those and shot them.
We went 275 for my setup. Mm-hmm. And we dropped down to 462, 247. And what was the last one?
The last one was like 224.
224.
Okay, so from your fastest to your slowest was what, 50 feet a second?
Yeah.
Your drop is more than double with 50 foot a second. It's not a proportion of ratio equal, okay? So when you start looking at going from 300 to 270, it's like 1.5 times the gap. Just look at a sight tape drop. It's drastic. We're not talking a little drop. We're talking a lot of drop.
Right.
And at the end of the day, the animal's got a given amount of reaction time from when you fire till you hit it. You're going to hit more where you're aiming the faster it goes because the target hasn't moved. And then if you're guessing how far away it is, your trajectory being so much tighter, you're more likely to hit where you're aiming by a massively better ratio. And we're not talking 5% better. We're talking 30% better.
Archery is a game 40% of inches, better. Friends.
Yes, you're not going to always know. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to sit there and tell me, well, I'm not going to shoot if I didn't know, I wouldn't believe you.
So if you and I were like massively into just pig hunting and I'd say whitetail hunting from a tree stand, I would be the first one to tell you that I ain't afraid to shoot a 600 grain setup. Like you give me 25% FOC, I'll shoot whatever I want and crush through whatever I want.
If you're taking distance out of the equation, sure, knock yourself out. If everything you're going to shoot is 20 yards, and while you're at it, you probably ought to get the most forgiving bow that's really slow and feels really good, because it doesn't matter how fast you are at 20 yards. It matters how fast you are at 40 yards or 50 yards or 60 yards. That becomes very relevant. So it's not just what's the best setup, it's what are you doing with it.
And that's why I want to bring Josh on. I just wanted to bring in, hey, once you take distance into consideration, because you're coming out west, and you need to do your math and figure out not only what's the average shot most guys are getting on antelope, bedded mule deer, or a standing mule deer, or a bull bugling broadside. Like, it's not 10 yards, it's not 20 yards. I bet it's somewhere in that 20 to 40 yard range, and it's obviously subjective to how good a hunter you are. Sure. I encourage you to get as close as possible. Me personally, the closer I get every step, the more confident I am that thing is going to die.
Yeah.
Which is why we bow hunt. But when we can keep distance in the equation, guys, that's when trajectory and accuracy is probably pinnacle of the whole deal.
100%. And if you're adamant about shooting a broadhead that doesn't penetrate well, and you have to be
like a mechanical.
Well, some do actually, so you can't just fairly say that. Most mechanicals are larger in cutting diameter, and that's why they don't penetrate as well.
Right.
Not because it's not efficient, not because it doesn't work, like some people want to believe in their head. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work. It's, am I trying to displace a bigger hole? Am I trying to displace more mass with what I'm doing? Then yes, it becomes relevant, and you may want to pay attention to that. But once again, 1 3/4 mechanical, clean through elk. Quartering shots, clean through elk. 30, 40, 50 yards, clean through elk. 400 grain arrow. Is it that important? And how important is it? Most of these instances that are nightmares where people don't penetrate, it's because their arrow isn't actually tuned. Like their arrow is flying sideways.
Yeah.
If you take your arrow and it's supposed to fly like this, and it flies like this, every time it turns, you're losing energy.
You're just leaking.
You're
over
bleeding.
The place. Yeah.
Yes, so that has to be perfectly tuned to get optimal penetration and optimal success. It's just really important. It's massively important. So you can't just pay attention to one part of the equation. It's a whole equation.
Okay, so let's boil it down. We're going to distill it down to this right now, guys. This is Josh and Dan, which we're not on the same page, but we're way closer than when we started.
You'll
right?
get there eventually.
God. Oh, you're paying my ass. But it's true. Like, I have come a long ways. But
I know it hurts when I'm right and you're
I
wrong.
don't know.
I know that's hard.
I will
get
not
that.
shoot elk with anything mechanical expandable ever. I worked too hard for that shot opportunity.
I've never tried.
And I really like the idea of 3 holes or like a triangle on the entry and the exit. The exit's where the arrow goes through and comes out the other side.
Every time I shoot something, yeah, I'm
Whatever.
I've never not gone all the way through something, Dan. Other than one time I shot something in the shoulder because it turned as
now
my
I put a
red foam
Grim
arrow got
Reaper
there.
Micro Hades 3 blade through a scap and I got that bull. And then I've also put a chisel tip through the humerus, but it wasn't smack dab in the middle of the bone. But I crushed through and got in. But anyways, the bottom line is...
Yeah, but did you go out the other side?
Oh yeah, pass through.
Nice.
Through pass through. But it was a 535 setup. That was a pretty heavy
and
setup.
you were how many pounds?
80 something.
80 something pounds. Yeah, pretty excessive.
And a fairly close shot.
And how far away was it?
Like maybe 15 yards.
Yeah, it's really close.
Yeah, very close.
I would rival that probably most things went through. The one time that I didn't penetrate when I hit a shoulder, which I've gone through shoulder materials multiple times, but the one time I didn't. And mind you, I was shooting a 2-blade lead cut style 1.1/8 cutting diameter, the best penetrating thing you could possibly have shot in that scenario, not a mechanical broadhead. If you hit the right spot in there, you're not going through.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And for the record, I was shooting 85 pounds at the time. And I shoot 70 now. I don't shoot anything more than that. Am I drilling? It's hard to get things to tune. So Ashby's stuff, we're going to talk about Ashby. We got to talk about who Ashby was and what he used. He used a traditional bow. He used a 3-to-1 cut ratio broadhead. So it's like this long and that wide. There's almost nothing made like that anymore. It's really hard to find, and that's what he used. And what he said in his equation was that shape of broadhead was more important than anything. It was more important than FOC, it was more important than heavy. And why is that? Because something that's 3 times as long as it is wide has the least amount of resistance to penetrate through tissue. Not 700 grain arrows, not any other equation portion of it. It was the broadhead type.
Science.
And, well, science, yes. And he was shooting something that generated 30 pounds of energy.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. We're shooting things that generate 80 to 90 pounds of energy.
Yeah.
We're shooting something that produces 3 times what he was using. Why are you giving such a fixation on that portion? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't understand why it's so much is fixated on that. If you shoot something that's designed like that, I would be willing to bet you could probably shoot a 350 grain arrow and go through.
This is Dan's little tidbit. Out of all the podcast guests I've had, I haven't really interviewed too many people way over 550 grains. Majority are close to that 500 mark. In fact, I would say the majority are under 500 total weight, under 500 grains. And a few badasses were creeping towards that 420 mark, even this jackass. So guys, yeah, it's really your journey. Trajectory is pretty important. If you shoot at elk with multiple pins and they move and you guess the wrong yardage, or you make a bad shot, or they hear the arrow coming, I'm looking for a flat trajectory, I'm looking for speed, I'm looking for forgiveness, I'm looking for power, kinetic energy, everything we've talked about today. So for me, I'm at 460 right now. He's gonna be tempting me to drop down to the next tier, and that's okay. We will tinker with it, and I'm just looking for a sight tape that's like this, pins that are like this, and arrows that shoot flat right through elk. Let's just pin Josh down to a couple questions. Josh, just give us a rating. 10 being the utmost highest, 1 being like, who gives a shit? Arrow stiffness.
How important is it?
Yeah.
You better have a stiff enough arrow for what you're trying to do. Like, that's super important. That's why a lot of these things don't work very well. If you make a 300 spine arrow and put 200 or 250 grains in the front of it and you're shooting it at 70 pounds, I guarantee you that arrow's not stiff enough.
Spine alignment.
Spine alignment's pretty important.
Give me a number.
Out of 10, spine alignment's probably a 3 or a 4.
Bach.
If the,
Center.
hold on, the quality of arrow circumference and
Yeah.
how well it's made is going to dictate whether or not spine alignment's really important. I'll give that a 3. FOC, I give FOC a 6 or a 7. FOC is pretty important.
What's your sweet spot that you think?
I like 15%, but I also won't run an arrow more than probably 420 total or 430 total, personally. So my FOC doesn't line up with most people's FOC. In order to get 15%, I'm using a light GPI arrow. Because speed is important. As much as I'm not a speed freak, I don't shoot bows that are excessively fast. I shoot bows that are relatively forgiven at a higher rate of speed so the animal has less time to react.
Knock tuning. Knock, like indexing your knocks, literally. More back to spine alignment.
Oh, well, yeah, if you're using spine alignment, that knock better line up right, or that's pointless.
What would you give that as?
Oh, that's a lining up your knock with your spine alignment. I'd give that like a 10. Like that,
Okay.
That'd be dumb not to do it. If you're arrow spine aligned, you better be lined up right. That's stupid not to.
Broadhead tuning.
My definition of broadhead tuning is the broadhead straight out of the arrow, not the blades and the fletchings lining up. You've probably heard that a lot,
Same
but that's
here.
super important. I have never found an instance where they flew differently as long as the broadhead was straight out of the arrow. What I mean by that is put it on a spinner and does your broadhead wobble or does it spin like a top? If it spins like a top, it is going to shoot the same. The blades and the fletchings not lining up doesn't really matter. Now, if you're running to where your fletching may hit something or your blade may hit something when it's leaving your bow, then it's relevant. But if everything has full clearance all the way around your shelf and your riser and where your little arrow thingy sits to make sure nothing touches, as long as they're clearing, it does not matter if they line up. It only matters that it spins straight out of the end of the arrow.
That's killer. Okay, so I did say broadhead tuning. I'll go back a step. Bear shaft tuning.
Bear shaft tuning and broadhead tuning is the same thing. I don't know why you would bear shaft tune if you're going to use a broadhead on that setup. Just get your bow tuned with a field point through paper and make sure it lines up square and you're not deviating more than like a 16th left to right on your arrow rest when you're trying to tune your left and right, if you have the ability to adjust your cams. And if you get a clean hole through paper like that, shoot and adjust your sight to where you hit at 20 yards and then shoot a broadhead at a field point and see where they hit to each other. That will tell you the same thing a shaft will tell you without the risk of snapping your arrow in half. Because if your bow isn't tuned perfectly and you shoot a shaft out of your bow at 16 to 20 yards, it may strike the target at such an angle that it'll break it. I don't believe in shaft tuning, I believe in broadhead tuning.
Last question. 2021 total arrow weight and FOC broadhead for elk.
Ideal?
For you.
For me, I won't be more than 420. I'll use a 100 grain head. I'll probably use an insert somewhere around 60 grains, depending on what it ends up with. There's 3 arrows I'm going to play with and try to determine which one I like better. I think I know where I'm going to end up, but I like to test things. I don't just want to blindly use one. So I'll probably end up with about a 420 grain setup, somewhere in there with about 15% FOC. That includes having a lighted knock on the back of my arrow at that 15%. So I'll probably end up with the same arrow we built Dirk, most likely. I will test 3 different ones, and if one of them just happens to group a lot better, because that will happen. You know, you'll build something, think it's perfect, and go out and shoot it at distance over and over and over, and one will group better than the other, and that should be what you use in that scenario, because at the end of the day, you got to hit where you're aiming over everything else. Nothing's more important than accuracy.
Love it. Guys, thanks for watching the channel. Pretty fun discussion on FOC. Straight up experience. Josh, 30 years plus in a shop. Me, going on my 20th year elk hunting. My archery setups have always been heavier, like in that 5 to 530 total weight setup. The last few years, I've been hovering around the 460 mark with great success. Josh is trying to get me to step down to the next tier, which I might consider, but ultimately meet in the middle. You got people way over here, find what's gonna work best for you and base it off of experience, not just what you think is cool or whatever, but what's gonna work best for you and your hunting applications. We appreciate you guys coming to the channel. Make sure that you give this one a subscribe. Check out Podium Archer, not only the website, but his YouTube channel as well. Give it a thumbs up, drop comments below, tell us that we're dumb. We can't wait to read your comments, and we'll catch you on the next one.